The night was heavy and humid in Puerto Plata when the passengers finally boarded. A Boeing 757 that had been sitting idle at the airport for weeks waited in silence, as if asleep or holding its breath. Nobody could imagine what that silence was hiding. The plane began taxiing toward the runway. The engines hummed softly but steadily. Passengers settled in, fastening seatbelts and checking their phones, while the captain and first officer ran their final checks. The runway glimmered with yellow and white lights under the humid night sky. The takeoff was tense, the aircraft slowly gaining speed. At the end of the runway, it lifted its nose and climbed into the dark Caribbean, leaving behind the ground and the airport murmurs. Minutes later, at about 8,000 feet, tension started to rise. The captain noticed his airspeed indicator showed nothing. He looked at the first officer, who appeared equally concerned, and they relied on the first officer's instruments to continue the ascent. For a moment, everything seemed under control, but an invisible chill began creeping through the cockpit. Incoherent alarms suddenly sounded from all directions. The plane claimed they were going too fast. The first officer insisted they were too slow. The autopilot reacted as if fighting an unseen enemy. Sounds no pilot wants to hear filled the space. Beeps, low humming vibrations, and metallic bangs resonating with every shake. The captain reduced power, trying to stabilize the aircraft. What had been confusing turned deadly. True airspeed dropped. The plane shuddered. A low hum vibrated through the yoke. The stall warning, "We're falling," shouted the first officer. Cockpit lights flickered as the aircraft banked sharply to the right. Outside, only darkness. Passengers who moments before adjusted pillows or checked phones were now thrown against their seats. The roar of the engines mixed with screams of terror. The Boeing went into a nosedive. First, a deep silence filled the cabin. Silence of helplessness. Silence where fear gets trapped in the throat. Then, the screams escalated, mixed with twisting metal. The altimeter fell like a clock running to zero. The pilots pulled on the controls with all their strength, but the plane no longer responded. It was like trying to lift a house with your hands. Air vibrated around the fuselage. Every final second was a blur of voices, alarms, and metal groaning. The descent was brutal. At 11:47 p.m., Flight 301 hit the sea with a force capable of destroying everything. Pieces of the plane were scattered across hundreds of meters. None of the 189 on board had a chance. Days later, when the flight recorder was recovered from the ocean floor, the truth appeared. The captain's airspeed sensor had been blocked by a hardened mass of mud, the remains of a nest, built by a tiny wasp that had found the pitot tube while the plane was on the ground and used it as a shelter. A nearly invisible creature entering the wrong tube at exactly the wrong time caused one of the most violent crashes in aviation history. So tiny, so silent, yet capable of changing everything. What seemed like a routine takeoff, a normal night, became a tragedy. A story that reminds us how even the smallest details can have unimaginable consequences.